Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. Where I can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 119 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, and today's episode is on what are the benefits of prioritising friendships. So this is a social psychology podcast episode with, quite a dip into clinical psychology, because of course, as we know, if we don't prioritise friendships, if we don't keep our social relationships alive, then this really can impact our mental health, which can lead to lots of undesirable outcomes. So this is a very important episode for clinical psychology reasons, mental health reasons, and basically this is just such a critical area, so that's why we're covering it today on today's episode. And it is Friday the 5th of November 2021 as I record this, and in the UK this is known as Bonfire Night because Guy Fawkes tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament in the 1600s. In the 1600s. So I need to make sure that I record this earlier, just so you don't get lots of fireworks in the background. So moving on to the psychology news section. So moving from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And there are lots of good ones here today, but I'm only going to say 3. Massive study finds no link between time spent playing video games and well-being. Video games are perhaps one of the most politicised forms of entertainment media out there. In the decades since they were first created, governments, politicians, health bodies and beyond have voiced concerns that the amount of time some players spend in these virtual worlds could be detrimental to their mental health. Despite all this concern, there's been a lack of high-quality research into the effects of video games on player well-being. To remedy this situation, Matti Dahu and colleagues at University of Oxford, in a collaboration with several large game publishers such as Nintendo and Square Enix, conducted an ambitious longitudinal study. These fears that they concluded in the recent preprint on Psych AR Vix, which I completely butchered, are unfounded. And this is what I've spoken about a lot of times on the podcast before, because all of these concerns, for example, video games are responsible for the mass shootings. They make people, they desensitize people to violence. They make people these horrible mass killers, and on and on and on. Are just not true. And there's so much research that says that video games don't actually do this. And I forget when it was. It was probably in the 90s for this, between episode 91 and episode 99 of the podcast, that I actually did a reflection on this, because I actually covered it on the podcast before in another psychology news section. And even if we believe this, and even if this is brand new information to us, this doesn't mean that we've fallen for someone's political ambition. Yes, someone's unfounded concerns. But it just means that whenever we hear something, we always need to question how true it is. Is it actually research supported, or is it just hearsay? So it's very good that there is a more high quality research coming out of this, just so we can test these beliefs. So the next one is frenemies both help and harm each other at work. Think about your relationship with your colleagues. I bet there are at least some who you're called frenemies. Maybe there's a co-worker, whose sense of humour you love, say, but who also irritates you by failing to pull their weight. In fact, the workplace is the ideal breeding ground for relationships that are characterised by simultaneous strong positive and negative feelings. So-called ambivalent relationships, or frenemies, note the authors of a new paper in the Journal of Applied Psychology. It's surprising then how little is known about how frenemies behave with each other. Shermil Melwati at the University of North Carolina, Chapter Hill, and Ramona Rothman at Lehigh University. So the pair ran a series of studies to find out. And I cannot agree more with this, because frenemies, it's just sort of one of those terms, and my mind would never go towards, let's find out what that actually means. So it's really, and this is something that I love psychology, and no, I'm not going to talk about the article too much, but this is what I love about psychology, because there are so many brilliant, really, really smart people in our psychology that actually gets us thinking like about these really common situations that we all find ourselves in and all of these common relationships. So this is absolutely great about psychology, and I'm really glad that we are researching everything, no matter how little or how insignificant it seems. It's good that we're researching it because we never know how significant these are things like could actually become. Because now that we know that frenemies can actually harm people at work, it'd be interesting to see, do they do more harm than good? And then what implication does that have for organisational psychology and mental health? So really glad this is just what I love about psychology. And the last one is, young people around the world report high levels of climate anxiety. In the past few years, the effects of climate change have become undeniably apparent. In the last 2 years alone, headlines have been full of the climate disasters, from forest fire smoke during San Francisco's sky a luminous red to torrential flooding in Germany and China. In the face of events like this, anxiety and fear about climate change is undoubtedly increasing. Far from being indicative of a mental illness or a mental health difficulties, as I prefer to call them, climate anxiety, also known as eco-anxiety or climate distress, more neatly fits under the banner of a practical anxiety, fears that motivate change to help us respond to threats. Even though this in itself is useful, the experience of fear can be unrelenting and have serious consequences for mental health and functioning. Young people are more at risk than these from older generations. An uncertain and dangerous climate situation poses the most risk to their futures, after all. It's with this in mind that Caroline Hickman and her colleagues at the University of Bath set out to investigate the extent of young people's feelings and thoughts on climate change and the functional impact associated with them. In their global study, posted as a preprint in SSRN, they look at how threats of climate change, as well as government responses to these threats, affect the emotions and day-to-day functioning of young people. So I'm not going to click on the article and actually go into the depths of the research, because the title summarises it quite nicely. But there are two things that I do want to comment on. First of all, it's actually brilliant that there are more preprints coming in psychology, because if we all remember the crisis, at least in social psychology, which is where numbers of really notable studies are actually found out to be falsified. And then we've also got the publication bias, which is where only really interesting, really engaging, very different studies actually get published, and preprinting is a possible solution, because we're preprinting, and there's something about submission form I remember from a talk there. So it's great that we are using preprints more. But what I also want to say is that to some extent that this is actually quite heartening to some, I guess, in the way, because it shows that younger people do but want the climate change crisis to stop. And yes, it's concerning and about the mental health, but hopefully, and of course I'm being very optimistic here, hopefully that will only add urgency to the government responses about the climate change crisis, because of course climate change does not just affect the climate and the environment, it also affects the economy, global public health and mental health. So but this is all very, very interconnected, but it's very interesting. So I hope that you enjoyed the psychology news section as much as I have. So let's move on to the personal update. So moving on to the personal update. So this week I actually want to start off with a slightly sad note, because as I found out on Monday, Aaron Beck has died on Monday, which is very tragic at the age of 100. And I was just no. And normally I do not have that sort of reaction to deaths for people that I don't know, because I simply, because I simply just don't know them. And but when I found out that Aaron Beck had died, I was no, but simply because he had contributed so much to psychology. And the reason why I actually wanted to mention it on this personal update was I have no idea, really. Just to sort of highlight that he did an amazing work for psychology. Without him, psychology would be completely different. Clinical psychology would be completely different. Mental health would be completely different, because of course it was him in the 60s that created his theory of depression and all of the cognitive explanations. Then he went on to create cognitive behavioural therapy, and then cognitive behavioural therapy became the solid foundation for lots of modern practices, dialectical behavioural therapy, and so many other great psychotherapies. So he did an amazing work. He's an amazing person, and it's really sad that he died. But but at least he could sort of die knowing that he really will be remembered for like ages, because he did such outstanding work. Yeah, so that's like mini like eulogy. So we're moving on to slightly happier topics. On Monday I went out for the first time because I've been out tons of times though, since the pandemic and like at the end of lockdown now, because I've been to London, but I haven't actually been to university for God, at least 18 months, 18 or more months, because I left the university and I came home on the Thursday before the first lockdown here in the UK. So basically, it was 18 months. So it was a very, very long time ago. Yeah, but I went there for a meeting with my placement supervisor and his PhD student. They're both lovely people. Then it was actually really nice to actually see people apply face to face and actually have such a good meeting. But then I went to a social, and the reason why I wanted to mention this is actually, first thing is hello everyone, because placement supervisor did a little promo for the podcast. So in case any of you decided to listen to the podcast, welcome. It's great to have you here, and it's actually great to have you all here. But then I also wanted to mention this, though, is that I also know that some listeners of the podcast have actually just started university, and they might be a little nervous about going into university socials, though, because even though this is my sort of third year of being at university, my impression of university socials, because this is all I knew from first year, that was that the people would be drinking, there'd be lots of partying and clubbing, which now I say actually reminds me about how silly the perception was. But I don't drink, I don't like partying, and I really don't like clubbing. So I was really nervous, and I really did not want to go there. But I went, and it was a great time. I have met so many amazing people, and the Pictionary game was absolutely brilliant. So I just had so much fun, and it was so nice to see more people face to face and hear so many great stories though. Because as an icebreaker, we did 2 truths and a lie, and that was just hilarious. And yes, it was just so great to hear everyone's very weird stories. The reason why I want to tell you this is just that if you're new to university, even if you've been going to university for a little while, I really do recommend that you do go to these socials, because they are fun, they can be really good, and if they're a university-based one, then there's not going to be drinking, clubbing, and everything those. And everything there, but they are going to be fun. So I just thought that I would put that out there in case that you ever need it. So as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment on the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can also tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi-whiteley. I always love to hear from you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Social Psychology, a guide to social and cultural psychology, 3rd edition. So this is an absolutely brilliant book that I cannot recommend enough, because this really does go into great depth about social psychology and why it's so interesting, and it covers a lot of area. For example, from the cultural dimensions, and how culture can impact our behaviour. Then it also goes into the psychology of social groups, social influence, persuasion, and so many more great, absolutely brilliant topics. So I cannot recommend this great book enough, because it will really help you understand social psychology more. And this is not a normal, boring textbook. In fact, I never call these books textbooks, because these are written in a really engaging, really voicey, really fun ways. So I cannot recommend these great books enough. So that is Social Psychology, a guide to social and cultural psychology, 3rd edition, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can also be paperback, hardback, and large print versions from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you requested. And if you wanted to buy the ebook directly from me, then please go to payhip.com/connorwhiteley. And if you wanted to buy me a coffee, then you can do that at buymeacoffee.com/connorwhiteley. And all of these methods are a great way to help support the podcast, just so the podcast can keep going a little longer. So let's dive into the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about what are the benefits of prioritising friendships. And I know this doesn't sound like a topic we should be covering, because of course you just should prioritise your friendships. But as research has shown, there are some really great benefits that I cannot recommend enough. And this was such an interesting episode for me to research. So hopefully, hopefully that you're going to enjoy it. And some of the results are actually very surprising. So what are the benefits of prioritising friendships? So Lee Penguin et al. 2001, of course, complete lie, but to that, conducted a great study in 99 countries using 323,000 participants. And as this is the Psychology Well podcast, I absolutely love global research. And if you ever find any, please send it to me. I always absolutely love it. Okay. So when I saw this research used a lot of different countries that would allow us to imply some universal rules of behaviour, I was instantly interested, and I knew this would definitely be a podcast episode. So the researchers got the participants to use a number of rating scales to see how important friends were to them, how happy they were, how healthy they were, and some more information. So the researchers would get a full picture of the participant and the social groups. At first, if you've ever done social psychology, then you would probably guess of a few possible advantages, but I still think that some of these results are very worth thinking about. Because interestingly, the results showed that participants were rating their friends as more important, tending to be healthier, more satisfied with their lives, and happier, which is very important because it shows the importance of the social groups of humans and their mental health. Furthermore, the research shows that there were certain groups of people that were more likely to rate their friends as more important to them. These people were women, people in countries with less equality, people with higher levels of education, as well as people in countries that allowed people to enjoy life more. And these are countries that don't suppress people's needs for gratification through very strict social norms. However, when we dug into the research even more, we see that there's another layer to the data. Due to whilst it's true people who rate their friends as more important got stronger benefits from it, this correlation was stronger for some than others. Which this raises the question, who gets the most benefits from their friends? And it turns out on the whole, people from individualistic cultures, people that value freedom more, older people, women and people with lower levels of education tend to see more benefits from friendships than others, which I think is really interesting because you would have thought it would be more collectivist cultures, but you also tend to find that certain collectivist cultures, of course I'm not going to name names of certain massive countries here, they tend to suppress people's needs for gratification through very strict social norms. So I guess it makes sense that individualistic cultures God, I really cannot speak big words tonight. They would tend to see more benefits from their friendships. Overall, but the study shows very convincing evidence for the importance of friendships and how they affect both mental and physical health, as well as these conclusions have been supported by a variety of other studies, as discussed in my social psychology book. But there are some things to bear in mind. So as much as I would love to say this study, and because it's truly massive and it has results from all over the world, that is amazing, and I would love to have the resources to do my own global research. However, there are problems with this research, mainly because it's just all correlational, and the research was done by averages. So of course, there will be some men who strongly value their friends, some, yes, and then there'll be some women who don't. There'll be some people who are extremely healthy and happy despite not having many friends. In addition, the results aren't very strong, or the correlations are rather weak, despite the results being statistically significant, meaning the benefits of rating their friends as important were only slight. Personally, I think that whilst these were the results, there are still lots of benefits of having friends of a course and social relationships. From your mental health to social support to keeping mental health conditions away, social groups are critical for humans, but the research was still great. Overall, I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope that you learned something and I got something out of it. If you know someone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And please check out Social Psychology, A Guide to Social and Cultural Psychology, 3rd edition. It's a great book. I really do recommend it, and it really does build on what we've spoken about in today's episode. So that is available in all of the usual places. And if you wanted to buy me a coffee to just show a bit of one-time support, then please go to buymeacoffee.com/Con Whiteley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.